Hey folks, before the video starts, I want to say big thank you for the feedback you gave me in the last video. Again, I will be short and say, as every other video, to leave a like and hit the subscribe button. Also, don't forget to comment down below, helping me to give proof to YouTube that all of you who follow this channel so far are real people who watch my videos. Thank you, and I hope you enjoy. I downloaded a game from a dark website. The final level is set in my apartment, and it knew about the knife in my drawer. Alright, before I get into this, let me just say, I'm not a tech genius or some kind of hacker. I'm just a regular guy who got way too curious for his own good. And trust me, if you're even thinking about messing with the dark web, don't. Just don't. This all started about 3 weeks ago. It was one of those nights where you're just sitting around, aimlessly scrolling, completely bored out of your mind. Jake, my roommate, was out on a Tinder date, so I had the apartment to myself. I'd already burned through the last season of Stranger Things and was halfway through a bag of flaming hot Cheetos when I remembered something Tyler at work told me. Now, Tyler is the guy in the office who always has a story. Like, he's the one who swears his cousin got abducted by aliens or that he saw Bigfoot while camping. Normally, I'd just roll my eyes, but a couple of days ago, he was going on about this game he found on the dark web. It's not like regular games, he said. It's different, personal. He wouldn't elaborate, which of course just made me curious. So, that night, I decided to check it out. I'd installed Tor months ago after watching some random YouTuber talk about it, but I'd never actually used it. Firing it up felt like stepping into some forbidden part of the internet, like I was doing something I shouldn't be doing. The browser's layout was bare bones, almost unsettlingly empty, and I wasn't sure where to start. After about 15 minutes of searching, I stumbled across a forum with a thread titled, "Games for Those Ready to See the Truth." The post itself was simple, just a link to some sketchy site. I hesitated, but curiosity won out. The site's design was, well, straight out of the early 2000s. Black background, neon green text, and this creepy static noise that started playing as soon as I opened it. At the top, in big block letters, it said, "Where reality and games collide." There was only one download link on the page, labeled eidolon.exe. I don't know why, but something about that name gave me chills. It was like the word itself was wrong, even though I didn't know what it meant. I hovered over the link, and my laptop's antivirus immediately popped up with a big red warning. This file is unsafe. Proceed with caution. I should have stopped there, but nope. Like an idiot, I ignored it and clicked download. The file was tiny, barely a few megabytes, and it downloaded almost instantly. I sat there for a moment, just staring at the icon on my desktop. It was this pixelated, glitchy-looking eye. Something about it made me uneasy, but I figured it was just part of the dark web aesthetic. When I finally double-clicked it, my screen went black. At first, I thought my laptop had crashed, but then a single line of text appeared in white. "Welcome, Player 1. Are you ready to see the truth?" I sat there for a second, unsure if I'd just launched a game or invited some virus into my system. After a moment, a distorted, faintly robotic voice came through my speakers. "Begin." Then, the game started. The first thing I noticed was the graphics. They were bad, like early PlayStation 1 bad. Blocky textures, awkward animations, and this weird, off-putting lighting that made everything look wrong. The first level dropped me into a dark forest. There were no instructions, no map, nothing. Just a vague objective in the corner of the screen. Find the key. I walked through the forest for a bit, and that's when I noticed the signs. There were these wooden signs nailed to random trees, and they all had strange messages on them. Stuff like, "You didn't lock the front door. The light in your bathroom is still on." At first, I thought it was just creepy nonsense meant to freak me out. But then I realized it wasn't nonsense. I hadn't locked my front door, and the bathroom light was on. I'd seen it when I grabbed my Cheetos earlier. My stomach dropped, and I paused the game. I ran to the door, locked it, and checked the bathroom. Sure enough, the light was still on. When I came back, the game was still running, and a new message had appeared at the top of the screen. "Good, keep going." When I sat back down at my desk, I was already second-guessing myself. The weird messages on the signs, the eerie accuracy, it had to be a coincidence, right? Some clever algorithm pulling generic phrases designed to creep me out. That's what I told myself anyway. But something about the game made me feel watched. I pressed on. The forest was dark and endless, the trees unnaturally tall, their branches clawing at the starless sky. The sound design was simple, but effective. Rustling leaves, distant animal calls, and an occasional crack of twigs, like someone or something was following me. Every now and then, I thought I saw movement just outside my character's flashlight beam, but whenever I turned to look, there was nothing there. Eventually, I found the key. It was hanging from a low branch, just swinging there, like someone had left it for me. As soon as I picked it up, the screen glitched. Bright red static crackled across the screen, and for a split second, I saw an image flash. Something blurry, like a distorted face. It was so quick I couldn't process it, but it left me feeling sick to my stomach. The game transitioned to the next level, without warning. The second level was set in a diner. Not just any diner, though. It looked familiar. I couldn't place it at first, but as I moved my character around, it hit me. It was almost identical to this greasy little 24-hour spot Jake and I used to hit up after late-night parties during college. The layout, the booths, even the faded menu board. It was uncanny. The objective appeared in the corner of the screen. Find the customer who doesn't belong. There were only 3 people in the diner, all sitting in separate booths. None of them moved or said anything, but their heads were slightly turned toward me, like they were watching me out of the corner of their eyes. I approached the first NPC, a man in a business suit holding a newspaper. When I got close, a dialogue box popped up with a single line of text. "Do you regret what you did to her?" I blinked. What? Who was her? My hands were shaking, but I clicked to close the dialogue box and moved on to the next NPC. This one was a woman in a waitress uniform. Her back was to me, but when I clicked on her, she turned to face me, and her expression, her smile, made my skin crawl. It was too wide, like her jaw had been unhinged, and her eyes were hollow black pits. The text box popped up. "It wasn't your fault." Was it? I didn't even know what to do at that point. My heart was racing, and I kept telling myself it was just a game, just some dark web creep messing with my head. I forced myself to approach the third NPC, a man wearing a hoodie, his head bowed, his face hidden. When I clicked on him, my screen froze. The music cut out, and a new message appeared in the center of the screen. "You lied." Before I could react, the game crashed. I sat there, staring at my desktop, waiting for the game to boot me back to reality. But instead, my webcam light flickered on. I froze, my pulse pounding in my ears. I hadn't touched the camera, hadn't even opened anything that would use it. My screen stayed black, but I could feel it. Something was watching me. Then my phone buzzed. I glanced at it, praying it was Jake or some spam email, but it wasn't. It was a text from an unknown number. "Why did you stop?" I didn't respond. I didn't even breathe for a solid 10 seconds. Another text came through, this one with an image attached. My hands shook as I opened it. It was a photo of me, sitting at my desk, right now. I slammed my laptop shut and practically jumped out of my chair. My first instinct was to check the apartment, to make sure no one was inside. I grabbed the closest thing I could find for protection, a broomstick, and started creeping from room to room. The front door was locked. The windows were closed. There was no sign of anyone having broken in. When I finally convinced myself I was alone, I sat back down at my desk. My laptop was still closed, but the webcam light was on. I unplugged it and sat there, staring at the dark screen, wondering what I'd just gotten myself into. And then, without me touching a thing, the laptop powered back on. The screen flickered, and the game was there again. A new level. My heart dropped. This time, it wasn't some diner or forest. The background looked like a subway station. The third level loaded faster than the others, almost like it was eager to start. The station was dimly lit, the walls covered in grime and graffiti. It reminded me of the subway station I'd used last summer when visiting New York. The objective appeared in the corner of the screen. Find the man in the hoodie. There were a few NPC scattered around the platform, but they didn't move. Some were sitting on benches, others standing in small groups, but they all had this lifeless look, like mannequins someone had dressed up to look human. I walked past them, scanning the area for the hooded man. That's when I saw him. He was standing at the far end of the platform, right near the edge of the tracks, his back to me. The hoodie was dark gray, the fabric frayed at the edges. Something about him felt wrong. His posture was too stiff, too still, like he wasn't even breathing. I didn't want to get closer, but the game wasn't giving me a choice. As I approached, the text in the corner of the screen changed. "Don't look away!" I hesitated. My instincts were screaming at me to quit, to unplug the laptop and throw it out the window. But I kept moving. When I was just a few feet away, he turned. His face, or lack of one, will haunt me forever. There were no eyes, no nose, no mouth, just smooth, blank skin. And yet, I felt him looking at me, felt his gaze boring into me, like he could see straight through the screen. The music cut out, replaced by low, rumbling static. The screen glitched again, and then he was gone. In his place was a single word in blood-red text: "Run." Before I could process what that meant, a loud, metallic screech came through my speakers, and the game transitioned to a new level. My stomach dropped when I realized what I was looking at. It wasn't some abstract setting anymore. It was my apartment. I don't know what possessed me to keep going. Maybe it was morbid curiosity, or the sinking feeling that if I didn't finish the game, something worse would happen. Either way, the moment I realized the next level was set in my apartment, I couldn't move for a full minute. I just sat there, staring at the screen, hoping I'd misread it. But no, it was my apartment, down to the tiniest detail. The game's graphics which I dismissed earlier as low budget, suddenly seemed sharper. It was like someone had upgraded them mid-level. My crappy beige carpet, the scuff marks on the wall near the door, the half-empty can of Red Bull on my desk. It was all there, perfectly recreated. And the objective? Find the knife. My blood went cold. There's a knife in my kitchen drawer, the one with the bright red handle. It's not fancy or anything, just a cheap chef's knife my mum gave me when I moved out. But it's unique enough that I knew, without a doubt, the game was referring to that knife. No way this was a coincidence. I wanted to stop. I really did. But my hands moved on their own, guiding the character into the virtual version of my kitchen. The drawer was exactly where it should have been, the same little wobble in the handle that I've been meaning to fix for months. When I opened it, there it was, the red-handled knife, gleaming as if freshly polished. As soon as I picked it up, the screen glitched again, filling with static. A distorted voice crackled through the speakers, barely audible at first, but growing louder and clearer. It's already too late. The screen went black for a second, and when the game returned, the perspective had changed. I wasn't controlling the character anymore. I was watching from a new angle, like a security camera feed. My character stood in the middle of the kitchen, holding the knife, and then I noticed something else. There was someone else in the apartment. At first, I thought it was just another glitch, or an NPC the game had placed there to scare me. But as I stared at the figure, standing in the corner of the virtual living room, I realized it wasn't pixelated. The detail on this thing, it was too real. Even the way it moved was wrong. Not clunky like the other characters in the game. It was smooth, deliberate, almost human. I tried to move the character, but nothing happened. All I could do was watch as the figure inched closer to my character, its movements eerily slow, like it was savoring the moment. Its head tilted unnaturally, as if trying to look directly at me through the screen. And then the screen flickered, and I swear, the perspective shifted again. This time, it wasn't just showing the apartment from a new angle. It was showing my actual apartment. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. This wasn't a recreation anymore. This was live. My heart was pounding as I looked over my shoulder, half expecting to see that figure standing behind me. But the room was empty, quiet. I turned back to the screen, where the figure was now staring directly into the camera. Its face was pale, almost featureless, but not smooth like the man in the hoodie. This one had a mouth, barely visible, like it had been drawn on with faint pencil strokes. It opened its mouth wide, and a guttural, distorted sound came from my speakers, a mix between a scream and static. Then the screen went black. I thought the game had finally crashed, but then my phone buzzed. I flinched so hard, I nearly knocked it off the desk. The notification was from an unknown number. Check your drawer. My stomach twisted. The knife. The game was telling me to check my real-life drawer. My first instinct was to grab my phone and call someone. Jake, the cops, anyone. But as I reached for it, a new message popped up. No one will answer. It took everything I had not to throw my phone across the room. I forced myself to get up and go to the kitchen, my footsteps unnaturally loud in the silent apartment. The drawer was exactly as I'd left it, slightly ajar from earlier when I grabbed a fork for dinner. I opened it, and there it was, the knife. But something was wrong. It wasn't in the same position I'd left it. It was angled, as if someone had picked it up and set it down again. My hand started shaking as I backed away from the drawer, leaving it open. When I returned to my desk, the game was still running. The screen had changed again, showing a close-up of the knife in the drawer, the same angle I'd just seen in real life. And then, in bold, blood-red letters across the screen, the text appeared, "He's already inside." I didn't wait. I grabbed the knife from the drawer and bolted for the front door, not even bothering to check if anyone was actually inside the apartment. My only goal was to get out. I yanked the door open, ran down the hallway, and didn't stop until I was outside on the street, gasping for air. I stayed out there for hours, pacing the sidewalk, knife still clutched in my hand like some lunatic. It wasn't until my neighbor came out to smoke a cigarette that I finally came back to my senses. I asked her if she'd seen anyone go into my apartment, but she just gave me a weird look and shook her head. When I finally worked up the nerve to go back inside, everything was normal. No signs of forced entry, no figure lurking in the shadows, just an empty, eerily quiet apartment. But the game wasn't done with me yet. As soon as I sat down at my desk, my laptop screen flickered on again, unprompted. The webcam light turned on, and the feed on the screen showed me, sitting at my desk. The distorted voice returned, clearer this time. "We're just getting started." That was the last time I touched my laptop. I shut it down, unplugged it, and threw it into the dumpster outside. But the texts haven't stopped. I keep getting messages from unknown numbers, coordinates, cryptic phrases, even pictures of places I've been recently. And last night, I got another photo. It was a picture of my kitchen drawer. The knife wasn't there. I haven't touched the dumpstered laptop since that night. It could sit there for all eternity for all I care. But if I thought that tossing it would end whatever this was, I was dead wrong. The texts kept coming. At first, they were sporadic, 1 or 2 a day, but now they come like clockwork, each more invasive than the last. The photo of my kitchen drawer, with the knife missing, that was the beginning of something worse. It was like the game wasn't confined to the laptop anymore. It had spilled into my life, like it was unraveling the thin veil between the digital world and my reality. I locked every door and window that night. I even went as far as wedging a chair under the front door handle, like I was in some low-budget horror movie. It wasn't just paranoia, it was survival. But even with all the locks, something felt wrong. Office. Like the air itself was heavier, pressing down on me. I stayed up all night, knife in hand, flipping between YouTube and TikTok to distract myself. Jake texted me at one point, asking if I wanted to join him and his girlfriend for breakfast the next morning. I started typing a reply, but my phone buzzed with a notification mid-text. It was another unknown number. "Why didn't you invite me?" The words stared back at me, and for a split second, I convinced myself it was Jake pulling some elaborate prank. But Jake isn't the kind of guy who even knows how to prank. He's the type who forgets to unplug the toaster after using it. No way he was behind this. I ignored the text and decided I needed sleep. I'd been awake for nearly 36 hours at this point, and the exhaustion was hitting me hard. But as soon as I turned off the lights and climbed into bed, I realized my mistake. The texts didn't stop. Buzz. Another message. "Are you sleeping?" I put my phone face down on the nightstand. Buzz. "You shouldn't turn your back to the door." I froze. My bedroom door was open. It always is. I hate feeling boxed in when I sleep. Slowly, I sat up, knife still clutched in my hand, and turned toward the doorway. Nothing was there. just the faint outline of the hall, dimly lit by the glow from the streetlights outside. Buzz. Look closer. I wasn't about to take instructions from some random number, but something compelled me to. I grabbed my phone, turned on the flashlight, and aimed it at the hallway. And that's when I saw it. At first, it was just a shadow, a slight, unnatural outline against the far wall. Then it moved, just a subtle shift, like someone leaning ever so slightly forward. I couldn't see a face, couldn't make out any details, but the figure was unmistakable. Someone was there. My heart was in my throat as I stared, trying to convince myself it was a trick of the light, a weird shadow cast by the flashlight. But then the text came through. I see you too. I didn't wait. I bolted out of bed, knife in hand, and charged towards the hallway, flicking on every light I could reach. The hallway was empty, the living room still, the apartment eerily quiet, except for the hum of the fridge. No signs of anyone or anything having been there. But the texts didn't stop. Buzz. Running won't help. Buzz. I'm still here. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't even try. I spent the rest of the night sitting in my kitchen, knife on the table, phone in front of me, just waiting for the next text to come through. But they stopped as soon as the sun rose, like whatever was tormenting me thrived in the darkness. I told Jake about it the next day. Well, part of it. I didn't want to sound insane, so I left out the part about the texts and just said I thought someone had tried to break in. He offered to crash at the apartment with me, but I lied and told him I'd already ordered new locks and everything was fine. It wasn't. That night, I forced myself to fall asleep. I couldn't keep living like this, paranoid, sleep-deprived, jumping at every little sound. I kept the knife under my pillow, just in case, and left the hall light on as a precaution. Hours passed, and for the first time in days, I felt myself slipping into a deep, dreamless sleep, until I woke up. At first, I didn't know what had pulled me out of sleep. The room was quiet, the kind of stillness that almost feels deafening. I rolled over to check the time on my phone. It was just after 3 a.m., and that's when I noticed it. The hall light was off. My chest tightened as I stared at the dark doorway. I distinctly remembered leaving the light on. My fingers instinctively went to the knife under my pillow, gripping the handle tightly as I sat up. That's when the smell hit me. It was faint at first, like a whiff of something metallic, but it grew stronger with every passing second. Coppery, wet. My mind immediately went to the worst possible conclusion. Blood. I reached for my phone and turned on the flashlight, shining it toward the hallway. The light cut through the darkness, and there it was again, the shadow, standing just outside the doorway, motionless. Buzz. I nearly dropped the phone. The notification glared at me. The text reading, "You left the door unlocked." I hadn't. I know I hadn't. But the moment I read the message, I heard it. The faint creak of a floorboard, somewhere behind me. I whipped around, knife raised, but the room was empty. Nothing. No one. My phone buzzed again. "You're getting closer." I don't remember much after that. Just the pure, unrelenting panic that gripped me as I bolted for the front door, half expecting to feel someone grab me from behind. The locks were still in place, the chair still wedged under the handle. No one had gotten in, but as I yanked the door open and stepped into the hallway, I glanced back one last time. The figure was standing in the middle of my living room, perfectly still, its head cocked slightly to the side, watching. The door slammed shut behind me, and I ran. out of the building, down the street, and didn't stop until I reached the all-night diner Jake and I used to go to. I spent the rest of the night there, clutching my phone like it was a lifeline, but the texts didn't come again. Not until I got back home the next morning, when I finally worked up the nerve to return to my apartment. Everything was exactly as I'd left it. No signs of a break-in, no footprints, no shadowy figure lurking in the corners. It was as if nothing had happened, until I opened the fridge. Sitting on the middle shelf, perfectly scented, was my red-handled knife. It was clean, no blood or anything, but there was a single note taped to the blade. 4 words scrawled in messy, jagged handwriting. I never really left. I didn't touch the knife. I couldn't. Just looking at it sent chills crawling up my spine, like the weight of those 4 words was physically pressing down on me. I never really left. The apartment felt heavier than before, the silence deeper, almost suffocating. I slammed the fridge shut and backed away, my eyes darting to every corner of the room. It felt like the walls were closing in, like the air itself was watching me. I knew I couldn't stay. Not after this. I grabbed my keys, shoved my phone in my pocket, and bolted out the door. I didn't even care if my neighbors saw me sprinting down the hallway like a lunatic. All I knew was that I needed to get out of there, away from the apartment, away from whatever this was. I ended up at a Starbucks about a mile away, the kind that's open late for college kids cramming for exams. It was crowded enough that I felt safer, like there were too many witnesses for anything weird to happen. I ordered the strongest coffee on the menu, sat at a corner table, and pulled out my phone. I hadn't checked it since leaving the apartment. Part of me didn't want to, but I knew I had to. Sure enough, there was a new message from another unknown number. Did you think running would help? I nearly dropped the phone. My coffee sat untouched as I stared at the screen, my mind racing. Was it watching me now? Was it here? I scanned the room, trying to pick out anyone who looked out of place, anyone who might be behind this. But the faces around me were normal. Students, baristas, a guy in a business suit typing furiously on his laptop. Buzz, another message. You can't hide forever. The lights in the Starbucks flickered. Just once, barely noticeable, but enough to make my heart skip a beat. The text didn't seem like a threat anymore. It felt like a promise. I didn't go home that night. I couldn't. Instead, I wandered the city aimlessly, sticking to well-lit streets and crowded areas. I kept waiting for something to happen, for the figure to appear again, for the text to start back up. But the hours passed in relative quiet. It wasn't until dawn, when the streets were starting to fill with commuters, that I began to feel normal again. But the thing about normal is, it's fragile. It can shatter with just one sound. When I finally worked up the courage to head back to the apartment, I told myself I'd grab my stuff and leave for good. Find a new place. Maybe even crash at Jake's until I could figure things out. But the moment I stepped inside, my phone buzzed. Welcome home. The apartment looked untouched. Nothing out of place. No sign of the knife or the note from the fridge. It was almost enough to make me think I'd imagined it all. Almost. But the air felt wrong. Thicker. Heavier. I didn't want to spend a second longer there than I had to. I went straight to my bedroom and grabbed a duffel bag, throwing in clothes, my laptop, not the one I'd trashed, obviously, and anything else I could grab in 5 minutes. I was zipping it up when I heard it. A faint knock. Not at the door, at the window. My apartment is on the 5th floor. For a second, I thought I'd imagined it. Maybe it was just the wind, or a tree branch scraping against the glass. But then it came again, louder this time. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. I turned, my breath catching in my throat. There was a face pressed against the glass. It wasn't human. Not fully. The skin was pale and waxy, stretched too tightly over a gaunt, angular skull. Its eyes were pitch black, reflecting the dim light of the room like twin voids. And its mouth, it was too wide, stretching almost ear to ear, filled with teeth that were too sharp, too white. It smiled at me. I stumbled back, knocking over the duffel bag, my pulse thundering in my ears. I wanted to scream, but the sound wouldn't come. I couldn't move, couldn't think. All I could do was stare as it tapped the glass again, slower this time. It tilted its head, as if studying me, and then raised a single bony finger to its lips. Shh! I don't remember running out of the apartment. The next thing I knew, I was outside, panting like I'd just run a marathon, my heart threatening to beat its way out of my chest. I didn't stop running until I was halfway across the city, collapsing on a bench in some random park. The sun was up by then, casting everything in a warm, golden light that felt completely at odds with the terror still coursing through me. I didn't go back. I couldn't. I called Jake, made up some excuse about a gas leak, and asked if I could crash at his girlfriend's place for a while. He didn't ask questions, thankfully, but even there, surrounded by people, I didn't feel safe. The texts kept coming. They were less frequent now, almost like whatever was behind them knew I was trying to run, trying to distance myself. But they were worse, more personal. I'd get photos of places I'd been that day. Starbucks, the park, Jake's girlfriend's apartment building. Sometimes they'd be empty, just a snapshot of the location. Other times I'd spot it in the background. The figure, watching, waiting. A few nights ago, I woke up to a message that simply read, "It's time to come home." I don't know what it wants or why it chose me, but I can feel it, creeping closer with every passing day. I've thought about going to the police, but what would I even say? That I'm being stalked by some glitchy, half-digital nightmare from a game I found on the dark web. They'd throw me in a psych ward faster than I could finish the sentence. I'm writing this now from a motel on the outskirts of town. I've been bouncing from place to place, never staying in one spot for more than a night. But it doesn't matter. No matter how far I run, how carefully I plan, it always finds me. Last night, I woke up to the sound of my motel room door creaking open. I grabbed the knife I'd been sleeping with, a new one, not the red-handled one, and turned on the light. The room was empty, the door locked, but there was a message waiting for me on the mirror, scrawled in what looked like blood. There's no running, only playing. And now, as I type this, I can feel it again. Watching, waiting. I don't know how this ends. I don't even know if I'll be here to find out. But if you're reading this, if you've ever been tempted to explore the dark web, listen to me. Don't. It's not worth it. Because once it finds you, it doesn't let go. It never really leaves. I was hired to monitor a dark web feed of an empty room. Last night, I saw myself walk in. Alright, so I'm going to start this off by saying I'm not some tech genius or deep web explorer. I'm just a regular guy who got stuck in a bad situation and made some really dumb decisions because I needed money. Like, badly. This all happened about a month ago. I just lost my job at this coffee shop. Nothing glamorous, but it paid the bills. Except now, it didn't. My landlord wasn't exactly known for his patience, and my car was basically one pothole away from collapsing into a pile of rust. Long story short, I was desperate for cash. And desperation? It makes you do some really questionable stuff. One night, I was lying in bed scrolling through job boards on my phone. I'd already applied to all the normal listings, like data entry and freelance writing gigs, but most of them either didn't pay enough or never got back to me. Then, I stumbled on this post that caught my eye. Remote monitoring job, $500 per night, no experience required. Now, I know what you're thinking. Sketchy as hell, right? But the listing looked weirdly professional. It said the job was for a confidential security project and that they needed someone to monitor a video feed overnight and log any unusual activity. That's it. 6 hours of sitting on my ass, staring at a screen for $500 a night. They said the location was secure and the whole thing was perfectly legal. But the kicker? They emphasized anonymity. No interviews, no real names, just an encrypted email account and a PayPal for payment. They even said they provide the software. Honestly, the money sounded too good to be true, but I figured, what's the harm in applying? I shot them an email that night, and by morning, I had a response. Subject, you're hired from secure at monitoringnet.com. Thank you for applying. You've been accepted for the position. Your shift begins tonight at 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Below are your instructions and the software download link. Please ensure you're online and logged in before the start time. If you miss your shift, the contract will be terminated. The email was super short, with no details about who I'd be working for or what I'd actually be watching. But the download link worked, and I ended up installing this super basic program on my laptop. When I opened it, the interface was bare bones, just a black screen with a video window, a timer, and a text box for my notes. No settings, no options, nothing. It all felt off, but at the same time, $500 was $500. I figured, worst case scenario, I'd uninstall it and move on. So, I set an alarm for 10:45 p.m., got some snacks, and prepared for my first shift. When 11 p.m. rolled around, I opened the program and logged in. The screen loaded, and boom, there it was, the feed. At first, I thought there was something wrong with my laptop, because the video was just showing this plain, empty room. 4 blank white walls, no windows, and a single overhead fluorescent light buzzing faintly. There was nothing in the room at all, except for a steel door on the far wall. It looked heavy, like the kind of door you'd see on a bank vault, or in one of those old Cold War bunkers. I stared at it for a solid 5 minutes, waiting for something to happen. Nothing did. I typed a quick note in the text box. Room is empty. No activity. The shift dragged on. I tried to keep my eyes glued to the screen, but after about an hour, I started to feel stupid. Was this a joke? Like, was someone just paying me to watch paint dry? I even started to think maybe the job was a front for some scam. You know, like one of those things where they install malware on your computer when you download the software. But then, I noticed something. At first, it was just a feeling, like, you know when you're home alone, but you can feel like someone's watching you. That's what it was like. This weird sense that the room wasn't really as empty as it seemed. I kept glancing at the steel door, half expecting it to swing open, but it just sat there, silent. Around 3 a.m., the fluorescent light started flickering. Just once or twice, nothing major, but enough to make me sit up. I typed it into my notes. Light flickering, possible electrical issue. The rest of the shift was quiet. No shadows, no movement, just that constant, low buzzing from the light. By the time the timer hit 0, I was exhausted and more than a little freaked out. But hey, I'd just made $500 for sitting in my pajamas all night. The next day, I woke up to another email. Subject: payment confirmed. From secure@monitoringnet.com. Thank you for your report. Payment has been processed. Please log in again tonight at 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Sure enough, the $500 had hit my PayPal account. At this point, I figured I'd stumbled into the easiest job in the world. Sit, watch, report nothing, get paid, rinse, and repeat. But over the next few nights, things started to get weirder. It wasn't just the light flickering anymore. Little things began to change. Things that shouldn't have been possible in a locked, empty room. And by the time I hit my 4th shift, I realized I wasn't just watching something. It was watching me. The second night started out just like the first. I logged in at exactly 11 p.m. and there it was again, the same empty room, lit by that faintly buzzing fluorescent light. It was kind of weird how unremarkable the room was. Like, you could tell it wasn't just a random storage space or something. It felt staged, like it was designed to be unsettling without actually looking scary. Does that make sense? Probably not. Anyway, by this point, I'd started to accept that my job might just be watching a blank screen for 6 hours. But honestly, I didn't care. The money was rolling in, and I wasn't about to ask questions that could get me fired. So, I cracked open a Red Bull, pulled up the feed, and got ready for another long, boring night. Except it wasn't boring this time. About an hour in, I noticed something different. At first, it was so subtle that I thought I was imagining it. But the more I stared, the clearer it became. The camera angle had shifted. I hadn't noticed it the night before because I assumed the feed was fixed, like a security camera bolted to the wall. But now, the perspective was slightly lower, almost as if the camera had tilted downward. I rewound the feed to the start of my shift, but there wasn't any moment where it had visibly moved. It was just different. I typed it into the notes. Camera angle appears lower than previous nights. Possible equipment adjustment? I stared at the screen, trying to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe whoever set up the feed had tweaked the camera remotely. But if that were the case, why hadn't they mentioned it? My instructions were super specific about logging any changes, no matter how small. Wouldn't they want me to know about this? Around 1:30 a.m., the light started flickering again. This time, it wasn't just random flashes like before. It was more deliberate. 3 quick flickers, a pause, and then 1 long blink. The pattern repeated over and over, like some kind of code. I sat there watching it, my stomach doing flips. I didn't know Morse code or anything, but it felt deliberate enough that I jotted it down in my notes. Light flickering in repeated sequence, 3 short, 1 long. Then, at exactly 2 a.m., the light stopped flickering altogether. It didn't just go back to its normal steady glow. It died. The room was plunged into complete darkness. The feed went black, but the timer on the software kept running, so I knew it wasn't a glitch. The camera was still on. It just wasn't picking up any light. For a few minutes, I sat there, half expecting the light to come back on, but it didn't. Then I saw it. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. It was faint, barely more than a smudge against the blackness, but there was definitely something moving. A shadow. It was in the bottom left corner of the screen, just at the edge of the frame. I leaned in closer, trying to make it out. The shadow moved slowly, almost lazily, like it didn't care if it was seen. It was humanoid, but distorted. Its limbs were too long, its movements too fluid, like a puppet with half its strings cut. It drifted toward the center of the room, and for the first time, I noticed something else. The steel door. It was open, not wide open, just slightly ajar, enough that I could see the black void beyond it. How long has it been open? I typed furiously in the notes. Unidentified shadowy figure entered room from steel door. Door is partially open. The shadow paused in the center of the room, standing unnaturally still. It didn't have a face, at least not one I could see, but I swear I could feel it looking at me, watching me through the screen. My whole body was tense, my fingers frozen over the keyboard. I wanted to look away, to shut my laptop, and forget this ever happened, but I couldn't. Then it turned. It didn't walk or move like a normal person. It sort of glided, its head tilting at an impossible angle as it approached the camera. The closer it got, the worse I felt. My chest tightened, and my ears started ringing. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't make a sound. Just as it was about to fill the frame, the light flickered back on, and the room was empty. I sat there shaking, staring at the now empty room. The steel door was shut again, and there was no sign of the shadow. It was like nothing had ever happened. I checked the timestamp on the feed. Only 2 minutes had passed since the light had gone out. I typed up the rest of my report with trembling hands. Shadow disappeared after 2 minutes. Light returned to normal. No other activity observed. Then I logged out and shut my laptop. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I woke up to an email. Subject: follow-up required. From secure@monitoringnet.com. Thank you for your report. Please elaborate on the observed shadow and door activity. Was the door open prior to the shift? If not, at what time did it open? Details critical. Continue monitoring as usual tonight. They weren't surprised. That's what hit me the hardest. Whoever these people were, they weren't shocked or concerned by what I described. They just wanted more details. I spent the rest of the day debating whether to quit. $500 a night wasn't worth this. But then I thought about my rent, my car, and the fact that no one else was exactly lining up to hire me. I told myself it was just a bad dream, or maybe some kind of prank. Maybe someone was screwing with the feed to test me, to see if I'd reported accurately. Yeah, that had to be it. I convinced myself to log in again, but deep down I knew the truth. This wasn't just some empty room, and whatever was inside it, it knew I was watching. When 11 p.m. rolled around on the third night, I had to force myself to log in. My palms were already sweating as I clicked the icon on my desktop. The program loaded, and there it was again. The same empty room, the same steel door, the same fluorescent light buzzing overhead. But something was different this time. I couldn't pinpoint it at first. It wasn't anything obvious like the camera angle or the lighting, but the room felt heavier, like the air itself was pressing down on me through the screen. I sat there, trying to shake the feeling off, telling myself it was just nerves. The first hour passed uneventfully, but that feeling of heaviness didn't go away. If anything, it got worse. By 12:30 a.m., I noticed I was holding my breath without realizing it. My chest felt tight, my heartbeat too loud in my ears. I started typing a note to distract myself. No activity as of 12:30 a.m. Room appears unchanged. Feeling of unease persists, likely psychological. As soon as I hit enter, the light started flickering again. It was the same pattern as before. 3 short flashes, a pause, then one long blink. I'd convinced myself it was just some faulty wiring the first time, but now it felt intentional, like someone or something was trying to send a message. I leaned closer to the screen, watching the flickering light, trying to pick up on any changes. That's when I noticed it. The steel door. It was open again. Not wide open, just like before. A small gap, maybe an inch or two, but I knew for a fact it had been closed when my shift started. My chest tightened, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. I started typing. Steel door ajar at 12:37 a.m. No visible movement or source of activity. I barely finished the sentence when I saw it. The shadow. It was in the bottom left corner again, right on the edge of the frame. This time, it wasn't moving. It was just there, a black, blurry mass that didn't make any sense. It wasn't cast by anything in the room. No light, no objects, and yet it was solid enough that I could tell it wasn't just a trick of the camera. I rewound the feed, my hands shaking. The shadow wasn't there when the door opened. It had appeared after. I kept staring at it, waiting for it to move, but it stayed perfectly still. And then, just as I was starting to convince myself it wasn't going to do anything, it did. It spread. That's the best way I can describe it. It didn't move like a person or an animal. It stretched, its edges creeping outward like ink spilling across paper. Within seconds, it had doubled in size, and its shape was changing, elongating. It wasn't just a shadow anymore. It was becoming something. I couldn't look away. My hands were frozen on the keyboard, my breath shallow. The thing kept growing, twisting, until it was no longer confined to the corner of the frame. It was creeping toward the center of the room, its shape shifting as it moved. At one point, it looked almost human, like a person crouching low, their limbs too long and angular to be natural. But then it changed again, its form rippling like smoke. And then it stopped. The shadow froze in the center of the room, coiled like it was waiting for something. The steel door was still ajar behind it, and for a brief, horrifying moment, I thought it was going to leave the room entirely, but instead, it just stood there, watching, or at least that's what it felt like. It didn't have eyes or a face, for that matter, but I could feel it looking at me, not at the camera, at me. My fingers were trembling so badly that it took me 3 tries to type out my note. Shadow entity has moved to the center of the room. Behavior suggests awareness of observation. Door remains ajar. As soon as I hit enter, the shadow moved again. This time, it didn't stretch or ripple. It lunged. 1 second, it was standing motionless in the center of the room, and the next, it was directly in front of the camera. The screen went black, not because the feed cut out, but because the shadow was blocking the entire frame. I couldn't see anything, just an overwhelming void, darker than anything I'd ever seen. It wasn't just the absence of light. It felt alive, like it was crawling out of the screen and into the room with me. And then I heard it. It wasn't coming from the laptop. The sound was in my room, a faint scratching, like nails dragging across wood. It was coming from the wall directly behind me. I whipped around so fast I nearly fell out of my chair. The room was empty. My bed, my desk, my clothes piled in the corner. Everything was exactly as it should be. But the scratching continued, slow, deliberate, impossibly loud in the silence of the night. I turned back to the laptop, and my heart nearly stopped. The shadow was gone. The room on the feed was empty again. The steel door shut tight. It was like nothing had happened, but the scratching didn't stop. I slammed the laptop shut, my pulse racing, and grabbed my phone. I didn't even know who I was planning to call. 911? A friend? No one was going to believe me. Hell, I barely believed myself. But before I could dial, the scratching stopped. For a few seconds, there was nothing. Just the sound of my own ragged breathing. Then I got the notification. No caller ID. Don't look behind you. I froze, my thumb hovering over the screen. The message was simple, but it felt like a punch to the gut. I didn't want to look. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to stay still, to keep my eyes locked on the phone. But I couldn't help myself. I turned, and there, standing in the corner of my room, was the shadow. I didn't scream. I couldn't. The shadow in the corner of my room wasn't like the one on the screen. It was darker, denser, like it had soaked up all the light in the space around it. My bedroom felt colder too, like the air had been sucked out. I wanted to run, but my body wouldn't listen. I just sat there, gripping my phone like it was some kind of shield, staring at the thing that shouldn't have been there. It didn't move at first. It just stood there, its shape shifting slightly, like smoke trying to form something solid. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Was this some kind of hallucination? A side effect of staring at the screen for too long? But then, it moved. It didn't walk exactly. It slid forward, its edges rippling like liquid shadows. I scrambled back in my chair, nearly knocking it over. My phone slipped out of my hand and clattered to the floor, the sound way too loud in the oppressive silence of the room. And then it stopped, right at the edge of my bed. I don't know how long I sat there, frozen. Seconds? Minutes? It felt like hours. The shadow loomed over me, its form impossibly tall and formless. And then, just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, it started to shrink. It folded in on itself, collapsing like smoke being sucked into a vacuum, until it was nothing more than a faint wisp. And then it was gone. I didn't move for what felt like forever. My chest heaved, my breaths shallow and rapid, but my brain wouldn't process what had just happened. The corner of my room was empty again, the faint hum of my laptop, the only sound. I should have packed up right then and there, uninstalled that cursed software, and never looked back. But I didn't. Instead, I did the stupidest thing I could have done. I opened my laptop. The feed was still running. The room was still empty. But there was something new. Something scrawled on the far wall, in what looked like black ink. I leaned closer to the screen, my heart pounding in my chest. The words were simple, but they made my blood run cold. "You're next." I couldn't breathe. My hands hovered over the keyboard, but I didn't even know what to type. The steel door was shut tight, the fluorescent light buzzing softly overhead. But those words, they weren't there before. And as far as I knew, no one was in the room. At least, no one I could see. Before I could type anything, the light in the room started to flicker again. But this time, it wasn't the same pattern as before. It was erratic, frantic, like something was trying to break through. And then, for just a split second, the camera feed glitched. When the video came back, The steel door was wide open. I stared at the screen, my stomach twisting into knots. The feed was silent. No audio. No way to tell what was happening beyond what I could see. The camera didn't show what was on the other side of the door, but the darkness spilling into the room felt alive. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me through the screen, something that wanted me to know it was there. And then it moved. A figure stepped into the frame. At first, I thought it was another shadow, like the one I'd seen before. But this one was different. It was solid, human-shaped, and as it stepped closer to the camera, my heart nearly stopped. It was me. I don't mean it looked like me. I mean it was me. Same face, same clothes, even the same messy hair I hadn't bothered to fix that day. It walked into the center of the room and stood there, staring directly into the camera. Its expression was blank, almost lifeless, but its eyes were wrong. They weren't just looking at the camera, they were looking through it, at me. I don't know how long I stared at it. My hands hovered uselessly over the keyboard, my mind spinning. Every logical explanation I could think of crumbled under the sheer impossibility of what I was seeing. And then, just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, my phone buzzed. I nearly jumped out of my chair. My phone was still on the floor, the screen lighting up with a notification, no caller ID. Do you like what you see? I didn't answer. I couldn't. My hands were shaking too badly to even pick up the phone. Instead, I looked back at the laptop screen. The other me was smiling. It wasn't a normal smile. It was too wide, too sharp, like someone who'd only read about smiling in a textbook and was trying to imitate it. It tilted its head slightly, its eyes boring into me through the screen. Then, slowly, it raised one hand and pointed at me. The screen glitched again, the image distorting into a mess of static and fragmented pixels. When the video came back, the room was empty. No shadow, no doppelgänger, no writing on the wall, just the empty room, as if nothing had ever happened. But I knew better. I slammed my laptop shut and bolted out of my room. I didn't know where I was going. I just needed to get out of there. My apartment felt wrong, like the walls were closing in on me. I grabbed my keys and stumbled into the hallway, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps. I didn't stop running until I was halfway down the block. The street was eerily quiet, the only sound the distant hum of a passing car. I leaned against a lamppost, my heart pounding in my chest, trying to convince myself that this was all some kind of elaborate prank. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. My phone buzzed again. No caller ID. You can't run. I looked around, half expecting to see someone standing in the shadows, but the street was empty. I clutched my phone tightly, my fingers trembling as I opened the message. That's when I noticed the timestamp. The message had been sent before I'd even left my apartment. I didn't go home that night. I couldn't. I ended up sitting in my car at an all-night diner, staring blankly out the windshield as the hours ticked by. My laptop was in the passenger seat, and every time I glanced at it, my stomach turned. The events of the last few hours replayed in my head over and over, but none of it made sense. The shadow, the messages. I wasn't sure if I was losing my mind or if I'd stumbled into something I was never supposed to see. Either way, I knew one thing. I couldn't keep doing this. The money wasn't worth it. Nothing was worth this. But as the sun came up, the reality of my situation hit me like a freight train. My rent was due in 3 days. My car, currently running on borrowed time, needed a new alternator. and the $500 a night was the only thing keeping me afloat. Quitting wasn't an option. I told myself I'd log in one last time. Just one more shift, and I'd send them an email saying I couldn't do it anymore. I'd use the money to get by for another week or two while I found something else. Something safe. Something normal. At 11 p.m. sharp, I logged in. The room looked the same as always. Empty, sterile, lit by that same buzzing fluorescent light. I sat there, staring at the screen, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. My whole body was tense, like I was waiting for something to jump out at me. But for the first hour, nothing happened. I started to think that maybe last night had been some kind of fluke, a glitch in the software, or maybe even a really messed up prank. The shadow, the messages, the doppelgänger, it all seemed like a bad dream when I thought about it in the light of day. By 12:30 a.m., I almost started to relax, and that's when the feed glitched. It wasn't like the small hiccups I'd seen before. This time, the screen went completely black for a full 30 seconds. My heart was pounding as I stared at the timer in the corner of the program, watching the seconds tick by. Just as I was about to close the laptop and walk away, the feed came back. But the room wasn't empty anymore. At first, I thought it was just another shadow. It was standing in the center of the room, its form tall and thin, almost skeletal. But as I looked closer, I realized this was something else entirely. It wasn't a shadow. It was a person, or at least it looked like one. The figure was dressed in all black, with a hood pulled low over its face, obscuring its features. Its hands hung limply at its sides, the fingers unnaturally long and thin. It didn't move. It just stood there, perfectly still, facing the camera. I typed into the notes. Unidentified figure, in room, stationary, no visible movement. As soon as I hit enter, the figure's head snapped up. I flinched so hard, I nearly fell out of my chair. The figure was looking directly into the camera now, its face still hidden beneath the hood, but I could feel its gaze. It wasn't like the shadow's stare from the night before. This was different, sharper, angrier. Then it moved. The figure started walking toward the camera, slow and deliberate. Its footsteps made no sound, but I could feel each one, like a heavy weight pressing down on my chest. I wanted to look away, to shut the laptop and run, but I couldn't. I was frozen, my eyes glued to the screen. As it got closer, I noticed something that made my stomach turn. The figure wasn't walking normally. Its movements were jerky, unnatural, like it was a puppet being dragged along by invisible strings. When it was just a few feet from the camera, it stopped. For a long moment, it didn't do anything. It just stood there, its hooded face filling the screen. Then, slowly, it raised one hand. It was holding a knife. I didn't type anything. I couldn't. My hands were shaking too much. The figure stood there for what felt like an eternity, holding the knife in one hand and staring directly at the camera. And then it raised its other hand. It pointed at the steel door. The camera feed cut out again. This time, it didn't come back. The timer in the corner kept ticking, but the video window stayed black. I sat there, staring at the screen, trying to make sense of what I'd just seen. My chest felt tight, my breathing shallow, but I couldn't bring myself to move. Then my phone buzzed. No caller ID. Open the door. My stomach dropped. I stared at the message, my mind racing. What door? I was about to reply when I heard it. A knock. It was faint at first, barely audible over the hum of my laptop, but then it came again, louder this time. It was coming from my front door. I froze. My apartment was on the 3rd floor of an old building with no elevator and a security gate at the entrance. There was no way anyone could have gotten in without a key. And yet, someone, or something, was standing on the other side of my door, knocking. The knocks grew louder, more insistent. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought it might explode. I reached for my phone, my fingers trembling, and opened the camera app. Slowly, I crept toward the door, holding the phone out in front of me. When I was close enough, I turned on the camera and aimed it at the peephole. The hallway was empty. The knocking stopped. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. I lowered the phone, my breath coming in shallow gasps. And then, from behind me, I heard it. A whisper. I don't remember much after that. I think I blacked out. When I came to, I was lying on the floor, my laptop still open on the desk. The feed was back, but the room was empty again. The steel door was shut, the fluorescent light buzzing softly overhead. It was like nothing had happened, except it had. The next morning, I sent them an email. Subject: I quit message. I can't do this anymore. Please don't contact me again. I never got a reply. My PayPal account was frozen the same day, and the program disappeared from my laptop as if it had never been installed. For a while, I thought I was free. I tried to convince myself it was all just some elaborate hoax, but deep down, I knew better. And last night, I got proof. At 3 a.m., I woke up to a notification on my phone. It was a video file. No sender, no explanation. Just a file titled finalshift.mp4. I didn't want to open it, but I had to. It was the feed. The same room, the same steel door. Only this time, the figure in the hood wasn't looking at the camera. It was looking at me. And behind it, the steel door was open. I found a dark web post about a secret, perfect town. The town is real, but everyone there knows my name. Alright, so let me preface this by saying, I'm not the kind of person who usually shares creepy stuff online. I'm just a regular guy, like most of you. I work from home, scroll through TikTok way too much, and probably eat more McDonald's than I should admit. But something happened to me recently, and I can't shake it. Like, I can't sleep, and even when I do, my dreams are weird. I need to get this out. It started about 3 weeks ago. I was bored, as usual, after another late night of scrolling Reddit and binge-watching true crime videos on YouTube. You know those rabbit holes you fall into, where one video leads to another. Anyway, somehow, I ended up on a video about the deep web. It wasn't one of those shock value ones, just a dude explaining how the deep web works, like Silk Road, Red Rooms, which are probably fake, and other creepy stuff. I've always been curious about the deep web, but I never thought I'd actually check it out. The idea of messing around with Tor browsers and VPNs just felt wrong. But that night, I don't know why, I downloaded Tor. Maybe I was just bored, or maybe I wanted to prove to myself that it was all hype. Either way, I set everything up and dove in. At first, it was exactly what I expected. Sketchy-looking websites, dead links, forums with people asking for drugs, and illegal stuff I didn't want to stick around long enough to understand. I was just about to call it a night when I came across this one post. The title was simple: The Perfect Town, a hidden gem you'll never leave. It stood out because it wasn't selling anything illegal. It wasn't a scam, or at least it didn't seem like one. It was just odd. The post had this short description: Do you ever feel like life is too complicated, too messy? We found the solution. A town with no crime, no drama, and no sadness. Everything you've ever wanted is waiting here. No catch. Just follow the link below. There was a link at the bottom. And yeah, I know, clicking on it was stupid, but something about it intrigued me. The way it was written felt personal, like it knew exactly what to say to get me curious. The link led to a black screen with white text. Very minimalist. It just said, "Congratulations. You've been selected to join the community. Tell us your name, and we'll tell you how to get here." I hesitated. Obviously, I wasn't going to give them my real name. I mean, this was the deep web, so I typed John Doe, because, that's what you do. I clicked submit, and within seconds, a new message popped up. "Nice try," my full name. "We need the real you." I swear to God, I almost threw my laptop across the room. I didn't give them my name. I didn't give them anything. How the hell did they know who I was? I slammed my laptop shut and paced around my room, my heart pounding. It was late, like 2 a.m., but I felt wide awake. I double-checked my VPN, cleared my history, and even restarted my computer. I was freaked out, but a part of me thought it might have been a weird coincidence. Maybe it pulled my name from somewhere, like my browser or some cookie I forgot to block. I convinced myself it wasn't a big deal and went to bed. The next morning, I woke up to a notification on my phone. It was an email from an address I didn't recognize, perfecttown@protonmail.com. The subject line read, "Welcome home." I didn't open it right away. I was too scared. Instead, I went to Starbucks to clear my head. It's my go-to spot when I need to think. But when I got there, something felt off. The barista, this girl I'd seen a million times before, handed me my drink and smiled in this weird, almost forced way. She said, "Have a great day. My name. Can't wait to see you again." Okay, sure. Baristas say your name all the time. It's written on the cup, after all. But this felt different. The way she said it wasn't casual. It was like she knew me, like she'd been waiting for me to show up. When I got back to my apartment, I finally opened the email. The message was short. "The town is ready for you. Your journey begins now. Keep your eyes open. See you soon." Attached to the email was a picture. At first glance, it looked like a random Google Earth image of a small town. But when I zoomed in, my stomach dropped. In the center of the town square was a massive billboard with my face on it. I stared at the screen for what felt like hours. My face on a billboard in some random town I'd never seen before. My brain scrambled for a logical explanation, but nothing made sense. It wasn't just my face. It was me, smiling in a photo I didn't recognize. The background looked generic, a clean town square, surrounded by old-fashioned brick buildings, a fountain in the center. But the billboard was unsettling. It didn't look like an advertisement or even a welcome sign. It just had my face and one word, arriving. That word sent chills down my spine. Arriving where? And why me? I slammed my laptop shut and backed away like the thing might explode. My apartment suddenly felt too quiet, too dark. I grabbed my phone and started Googling, hoping for any clue about what I'd stumbled into. I searched for the phrase, "the perfect town," and filtered through the usual tourist traps and travel blogs. Nothing. No mention of a town like the one in the photo. Then I tried dark web perfect town. That's when things got weirder. I found a few Reddit threads, mostly on conspiracy subreddits. People talking about an urban legend, a place that only appears when you're ready. They claimed it was somewhere in the Midwest, but no one could agree on a state or even a region. Some said it was like stepping into a postcard where everything seemed too perfect. Others said it was a cold town where strangers acted like they'd known you your entire life. A few people even claimed they'd been there, but couldn't explain how they found it or how they left. One comment stuck out. It read, "If you've been invited, it's already too late." I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. This had to be a prank. Someone hacking my laptop or messing with me for a laugh, right? I wanted to believe that, but then I remembered the barista, the way she said my name, the way she smiled like she knew something I didn't. And it didn't stop there. Later that day, I went to grab lunch at a McDonald's near my apartment. I needed to get out of my place, clear my head, and maybe drown my paranoia in some fries. The drive-thru was packed, so I went inside. I was standing at the counter, waiting for my order, when the manager, a guy I'd never seen before, walked up to me. He wasn't wearing a name tag, but he had this clean-cut look, almost like a politician, which felt weird for someone running a McDonald's. "Enjoy your meal, my full name," he said, handing me my bag before I even gave my number. Then he leaned in closer. "We'll see you soon." I froze. I wanted to ask him what he meant, but the way he smiled at me, just like the barista, shut me up. It wasn't friendly. It was knowing, like he had some kind of inside joke I wasn't in on. I grabbed the bag and left without saying a word. When I got back to my apartment, there was another email waiting for me. Same address, perfecttown@protonmail.com. This one was different. It wasn't just text. It was a video. I hesitated, staring at the play button like it might bite me. I didn't want to click it, but at this point, I was too far in. My curiosity overrode my fear, so I hit play. The video was grainy, like it had been recorded on an old VHS tape. It showed the same town square from the photo, but this time, it was moving. People walked through the streets, smiling and waving at each other like they were in some cheesy Hallmark movie. There was no sound, just this eerie, almost static-like hum in the background. The camera zoomed in on the billboard. My face was still there, but now there was more text beneath it. "Welcome, my full name. You're almost here." The video cut to black, but it wasn't over. The screen flickered, and suddenly I saw something that made my blood run cold. It was me, sitting in my apartment, wearing the exact clothes I had on at that moment, staring at my laptop. The video wasn't just showing me, it was watching me. I slammed my laptop shut, my heart racing. This wasn't possible. Nobody was in my apartment. I checked the locks, the windows, even the tiny bathroom. Nothing. I was alone. Or at least, I thought I was. That night, I barely slept. Every creak of the floorboards, every hum of the fridge, every car passing outside sounded like someone coming for me. I kept checking my phone, half expecting another email, but none came. Around 3 a.m., I finally dozed off, my laptop still sitting on the desk across the room. When I woke up the next morning, it was gone. The laptop, just gone. I tore the place apart looking for it, but it wasn't anywhere. No broken locks, no signs of forced entry. Whoever or whatever took it hadn't left a trace. I wanted to call the cops, but what would I even tell them? Hey, someone hacked my laptop and put my face on a billboard in some imaginary town. Yeah, that would go over well. Instead, I tried to move on. I told myself it was over, that maybe the whole thing had been some elaborate prank, and whoever was behind it had gotten bored. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. A few days later, I got a package in the mail. No return address, just my name scrawled in perfect handwriting. I didn't want to open it, but I also couldn't not open it, you know. My hands were shaking as I tore the paper off. Inside was an old school map, like the kind you'd get from a gas station back in the day. There were no labels, no highway markers, just a single red dot in the middle of a blank space. Beneath it, in the same handwriting as the envelope, were the words, "We're waiting for you." For days, I couldn't stop staring at the map. I kept it shoved in a drawer under some old junk mail, but I'd find myself pulling it out late at night, tracing the faint lines with my fingers. The red dot felt magnetic, like it was pulling me in. I didn't want to admit it, but a part of me was curious. Where was this place? What would happen if I went there? I tried to ignore it. I really did. I went about my life as best as I could, but things kept getting strange. People around me started acting different, more specific, if that makes sense. Like, I'd walk into a store and the cashier would greet me by name before I even said a word. Neighbors I'd barely spoken to were suddenly way too friendly. "Hey, my name. Heading somewhere special?" one of them asked as I walked to my car. She had this weird smile, like she already knew the answer. Even my Instagram feed got weird. Random accounts I didn't follow started liking old posts, and their usernames were unsettling, welcome home, random numbers, ready for you 1 to 23, and one that just said perfect town visitor. The DMs were worse. I'd get these cryptic messages like, "You're so close now," or "It's better here." I blocked them all, but new ones popped up every day. I thought about deleting my accounts entirely, but honestly, it felt pointless. Whoever, or whatever, was behind this seemed to know everything about me anyway. They didn't need social media to get to me. Then, about a week after I got the map, I woke up to find my car's gas tank completely full. Here's the thing, I hadn't filled it. In fact, I'd been meaning to get gas that morning because I was running on fumes the night before. But there it was, topped off, like someone had done it for me. There was a sticky note on the windshield. No handwriting this time, just one printed word, drive. I told myself I wouldn't do it. I wasn't going to play into whatever this was. But by the end of the day, I couldn't stop thinking about the map, the red dot, the word drive. It was like an itch I couldn't scratch. The fear hadn't gone away. It was still there, clawing at the back of my mind, but it had been joined by something else. Curiosity. That night, I packed a bag, just the essentials, clothes, snacks, water, a phone charger. I didn't even know where I was going. The map didn't have street names, just those faint lines leading to the dot. But something told me I wouldn't need directions. I threw the map onto the passenger seat and started the car. The gas gauge was still full, and I swear, for a split second, the needle flickered like it was pointing farther than full. My hands were sweating as I pulled out of the driveway. It was almost midnight. I told myself I'd just drive a little, just to see if anything happened. But the moment I hit the highway, something changed. The road stretched out in front of me, longer than it should have been. The signs for exits and towns started getting fewer and farther between, until there were none at all. My GPS stopped working too. It froze on a blank screen before glitching out completely. I should have turned back right then, but I didn't. Instead, I kept driving. The air outside felt heavier, like it was pressing down on the car. Even with the windows up, I swear I could hear this low hum, almost like the sound in that video. About 2 hours in, I realized I hadn't passed a single car. No trucks, no headlights, nothing. Just me and the empty road. My phone didn't have service anymore, but I kept checking it out of habit. The screen stayed dark, except for one thing, a calendar notification. You've arrived. The time it popped up? 3:33 a.m. Just as I started to panic, I saw lights in the distance. They were faint at first, like fireflies hovering over the horizon, but as I got closer, I realized it was a town. Small, quiet, and eerily pristine. Everything looked new. Not new in the modern sense, but like it had been built to look like a perfect version of the past. The kind of place you'd see in an old postcard from the 1950s. I slowed down as I drove into the main street. The buildings were all lit up, their windows glowing with warm light, but there was no one around. No cars parked on the streets, no people walking around, just silence. Then I saw it, the billboard. It was even bigger in person, towering over the town square like some kind of monument. My face was still there, smiling down at me, but the word underneath had changed. Welcome home, my full name. The knot in my stomach tightened as I parked the car in front of the fountain. I sat there for a long time, gripping the steering wheel and telling myself this was a bad idea. I should leave, turn the car around, and get the hell out of here. But something told me it wasn't that simple. I got out of the car. The air was colder than it should have been, and the hum I'd been hearing the whole drive was louder now, vibrating in my chest. The town was still empty, but I could feel it watching me. As I walked toward the fountain, I saw movement in the windows, shadows shifting behind the curtains, faces peeking out before disappearing. That's when I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, and coming from every direction. I turned around, but no one was there. "Hello," I called out, my voice shaky. No answer. The footsteps grew louder, closer, until they were right behind me. I spun around, expecting to see someone, but there was nothing. Just the empty street and the glow of the billboard. Then, all at once, the lights in the buildings went out. I was plunged into darkness, except for one thing, the billboard. It was still lit up, and now the text had changed again. It's too late to leave now. The darkness wasn't like regular night. It was heavy, suffocating, like the air itself had been sucked out of the town. The billboard's glow cast strange, elongated shadows across the square, making the buildings look warped, almost alive. My own shadow stretched out in front of me, long and distorted, like it wasn't mine at all. The footsteps started again, louder this time. I could hear them echoing off the brick buildings surrounding me, but no matter where I looked, I couldn't see anyone. My heart was racing so hard, I thought I might pass out. Then, a voice. Low, calm, but somehow close, like it was being whispered directly into my ear. "Welcome home." I spun around, but there was no one there, just the fountain, the car, and the eerie glow of the billboard. The footsteps stopped, and for a moment, the silence was even worse. That's when I saw them, shapes, figures stepping out from the shadows of the buildings moving toward me, slowly at first, but with this strange, deliberate rhythm, like they were all in sync. They weren't running or rushing, but somehow that made it worse. There was no panic in their movements, just purpose. As they got closer, I realized they weren't strangers. They were me. Every single one of them looked exactly like me. Same face, same clothes, same everything. It was like staring into a funhouse mirror, but the reflections were real. Some of them were smiling, wide, unnatural grins that didn't reach their eyes. Others were blank-faced, their expressions completely void of emotion. I stumbled back, almost tripping over my own feet. My voice came out in a whisper, barely audible. What is this?" None of them answered. They just kept walking, their eyes locked on me. I backed up until I hit the fountain, the cold stone pressing against my back. My car was still parked where I'd left it, but it felt miles away now. One of the figures stepped forward, breaking away from the others. This one wasn't smiling. It was staring at me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. And then, in my exact voice, it spoke. "You don't belong here." Its voice wasn't just similar, it was identical, perfectly matched, down to the slight tremor I had when I was nervous. I opened my mouth to respond, but no sound came out. My throat felt dry, like I'd swallowed sand. Another one spoke, this one standing just behind the first. "But you came anyway." Same voice, same tone, like they'd rehearsed it 1,000 times. They were closer now, close enough that I could see the little details, the way their skin didn't quite sit right on their faces, like it was stretched too tight. Their eyes weren't right, either. They were too dark, too reflective, like the glossy surface of a camera lens. I bolted. I didn't think. I just ran, darting toward my car as fast as my legs would carry me. The figures didn't chase me. They didn't need to. As I yanked the car door open and jumped inside, I glanced back at the square. They were standing still, perfectly still, all facing me. Every single one of them was smiling now, not grinning, not smirking, smiling. Wide, toothy, impossible smiles that seemed to stretch too far across their faces. I slammed the door and jammed the keys into the ignition. The engine roared to life, and I threw the car into reverse, tires screeching as I backed out of the square. The figures didn't move, but their eyes followed me. Those dark, empty eyes reflecting the glow of the billboard. The road out of town was different now. It wasn't the clean, straight highway I'd driven in on. The pavement was cracked and uneven, with weeds poking through the gaps. The streetlights flickered erratically, casting just enough light for me to see the way ahead. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see those things chasing me. But the road was empty, just endless darkness stretching out behind me. And then the voice came back. "You can't leave." It wasn't in the car. It was in my head, loud, insistent, like someone shouting through a megaphone directly into my brain. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my knuckles turning white. "You came here. You belong to us now." "No," I muttered, shaking my head. "No, I'm leaving. You can't stop me." But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. The road was changing again, twisting, looping back on itself. The lines on the pavement started to blur, and the trees on either side of the road seemed to shift, their branches reaching out like clawed hands. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat, startling me so badly I nearly swerved off the road. I grabbed it without thinking, my hands trembling as I unlocked the screen. There was a new notification, just one. "Turn around." It wasn't a text. It wasn't an app notification. It didn't even have a sender. Just those two words floating on the screen like they'd been burned into the glass. I threw the phone onto the floor and focused on the road. The hum was back, louder now, vibrating through the car like a living thing. My headlights started to flicker, and for a split second, everything went dark. When the lights came back on, the road was gone. I slammed on the brakes, the car skidding to a stop. I was back in the town square. The billboard was still there, but the text had changed again. You can't escape yourself. The figures were waiting for me, standing in a perfect circle around the fountain. They weren't smiling anymore. Their faces were blank, their eyes empty voids that seemed to swallow the light. And then, as one, they spoke. "You're home." The word home echoed in the air like a church bell. The figures didn't move. They just stood there, surrounding the fountain, their faces blank and unnatural. The only sound was the low hum that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my fingers ached. My car was still running, but the dashboard lights were dimming, flickering, like the life was being drained from the vehicle. I tried to put it in reverse, but the gear shift wouldn't budge. It was like the car had fused with the ground. I wasn't getting out of here. Not like this. My breath was coming in short, panicked gasps. I looked out the windshield, trying to figure out what to do. The figures were still standing, perfectly still, their eyes, or whatever passed for eyes, fixed on me. But there was something about their stillness that felt like a trap, like they were waiting for me to make the next move. And then, one of them stepped forward. It didn't walk like a person. Its movements were jerky, unnatural, like a marionette being yanked on invisible strings. Its head tilted to one side, then the other, the motion sharp and mechanical. I could hear the faint crackle of its joints, like twigs snapping underfoot. When it spoke, it was in my voice, but this time, the tone was wrong. Too flat, too hollow. "Why are you running?" My stomach twisted. I opened the door and stepped out of the car before I even realized what I was doing. My feet felt like they were moving on their own, carrying me toward the fountain and the circle of figures. I wanted to stop, to turn around, but my body wasn't listening. It was like I'd been hijacked. The figure that had spoken tilted its head again, watching me with those dark, reflective eyes. Its mouth moved, but the words didn't match the motion. They came out disjointed, echoing, like multiple versions of my voice layered over each other. "You've been searching for this." "No," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "I didn't ask for this. I don't even know what this is." The others started moving now, slowly at first, their heads turning in perfect unison to face me. Their smiles returned, stretched impossibly wide, as if their faces were made of rubber. They didn't blink. They didn't breathe. They just stared. "You came here," another one said, stepping closer. "We didn't make you." My mind raced, trying to piece together what they meant. Had I done this? Had I somehow chosen this? The map, the emails, the strange encounters. They'd all felt like they were pushing me towards something. But why? "You don't belong anywhere else," the first one said. "That's why you're here." The hum grew louder, vibrating through my skull. I felt like I was standing inside a giant speaker, the sound pressing down on me from all sides. My knees buckled, and I dropped to the ground, clutching my head. My vision blurred, and for a moment, I thought I might black out. Then, everything went quiet. When I looked up, the figures were gone. The town square was empty again, the buildings dark and lifeless. The billboard still glowed, but the text had changed. "Look in the fountain." I didn't want to. Every part of me screamed to run, to get back in the car and try again, even if it was hopeless. But I couldn't resist. Something was pulling me toward the fountain, dragging me forward like an invisible leash around my neck. The water in the fountain was perfectly still, reflecting the billboard's glow like a mirror. I leaned over the edge, my breath fogging up the surface. At first, I didn't see anything, just my own reflection, pale and wide-eyed, staring back at me. But then the image started to ripple, shifting like the water was alive. The face looking back at me wasn't mine anymore. It was one of them. Its smile widened, and for a split second, I thought it was going to reach out of the water and pull me in. I stumbled back, nearly falling over, but the image didn't disappear. It just kept staring, its mouth moving silently, forming words I couldn't hear. The hum returned, louder than ever. This time, it wasn't just a sound, it was a voice. 1,000 voices, all speaking at once, overlapping, crashing into each other like waves. Stay. I clapped my hands over my ears, but it didn't help. The voices weren't outside, they were inside, echoing in my head. I staggered back to the car, desperate to get away, but when I reached for the door handle, my hand passed right through it. It was like the car wasn't even there anymore, like I wasn't there anymore. The voices grew louder, drowning out my thoughts. The last thing I remember is falling to my knees in the middle of the square, the glow of the billboard washing over me like a spotlight. I don't know how long I was out. When I woke up, I wasn't in the town anymore. I was in my apartment. Everything looked the same. My couch, my TV, even the half-empty can of soda I'd left on the coffee table. But it didn't feel right. The air was too still, too quiet. I walked to the window and looked outside, expecting to see my street. Instead, I saw the town square, the fountain, the billboard, the faces. I don't know if this is my apartment or some copy of it, but I can't leave. The door doesn't open and the windows don't break. My phone doesn't work. The town is always there, no matter where I look. And the billboard? It's still showing my face. But now, it's smiling.